Hey, everybody, and welcome to another episode of The Split, a young adult book review podcast for readers and writers. I'm Brian Cohen, the author of the Ted Saves the World series. That's Robert Scanlon, the author of the Dreamer Chronicles. Robert, we haven't done this for 2 weeks because we tape 2 episodes every 2 weeks, and I've missed chatting. I know we've chatted on another podcast this week, but I miss chatting about books. It's good to be chatting with books with you about books with you today.
Yes, even if either of us can barely speak. But we can write and we can read, and isn't that a great thing?
It is a great thing.
Because I think you can forget in the whole business of being a writer or an author that the reason why we were probably drawn to it in the first place is for stories. And it's wonderful to meet every couple of weeks and just kind of have this great big yarn about these wonderful stories and analyze them from both the reader's perspective and a little bit from a writer's perspective. And hopefully, people listening get something from that. Maybe they're drawn to read the book. Maybe they're drawn to reread the book. So yeah, I really look forward to it. Really appreciate it.
Yeah, of course. Likewise. So let's talk about today's book, Throne of Glass by Sarah J. Maas. As usual, summarize what we thought from a reader's perspective, writer's perspective, takeaways, and then a prompt at the end. I will start with the summary. Celaena Sardothien was the most feared assassin in the world at the age of 17, at least until she was caught and enslaved to a lifetime of hard labor in the salt mines of Endovier. When the Crown Prince Dorian rescues her from her fate, she's forced to compete for the position of royal assassin and her freedom. When the other competitors begin turning up dead, Celaena must play a deadly game and tap into an ancient power to keep herself and her friends alive. Oh, man. I was worried when we got this book, when it just showed up on the list, and that it would mimic Game of Thrones in its being long-winded and too many characters, storytelling style. But I needn't have worried because I absolutely loved this book. I recently wrote a post for my readers on my Ted Saves the World blog, Ted Saves the World email list, in which I rated this as my second favorite book I've read this year. And I thought it had great characters, great story. I'm totally hooked. I really feel as though we have to read the rest of the series on the show because I just really, really enjoyed it.
Yeah.
What do you think?
Well, it's interesting, isn't it? Because as you said, I think you brought the book to my attention first, and when I looked at it, I thought, oh yeah, it's meant to be a sort of young adult Game of Thrones, and to be perfectly honest, I didn't get on with Game of Thrones. I found it too sprawling, too many points of view, and so I gave up. It didn't suit my reading style. And I was a little worried, like you were, that this was going to be the same kind of thing, or that it was going to be the Hunger Games of Thrones, and, and there is some resemblance there, let's face it. And strangely, I wasn't sure whether I liked it or not in the early stages, but I kind of did, and I kind of kept looking forward to coming back to the story. So I think the characterization, especially of Celaena, is enough to keep drawing you back to the story, and there's certainly sufficient unexpected events. So, and I see from the reviews that a lot of people say the second book is fantastic. This first is it's a debut. I believe the author wrote the first draft at the age of 16, and spent 10 years in the making. So, there's a lot of effort and a lot of heart and soul gone into the book, and it's a great story, one that I would highly recommend. I think from a writer's perspective, like any book, it can be improved, and there were things that distracted me as a writer when I was reading it. But I'm with you. I really loved it. I wouldn't say it's the second best I've read this year, but I'd definitely put it up with a good, fun book to read for sure.
Yeah, well, you've probably read more books than me, so.
It's purely because of my age.
Oh, okay, fair enough. So you mentioned writer perspective. Let's get into writer perspective a little bit, unless you have more reader perspective thing.
Well, yeah, I think the interesting thing about the reader perspective is that you can see why this is a great young adult novel, because Celaena is a great teenage hero. You know, she's got these sharp skills. She is extremely calculating. You know, you spend quite a bit of time with Selena in her head, even though there are other points of view. And I think she's really well written, even though some reviewers said, oh, she was a bit whiny and angsty. I didn't find her that way at all compared to some of the other YA stuff where they really are pathetically whiny and angsty. You know, she's sharp, she's on the money, she plots, she plans. I wish she'd taken more action, but we'll come to that from the writer's perspective. But I can see why that the typical probably 14 onwards female reader especially would love this book, and definitely recommend it to anyone who's got children, or if you are that age and you want a great book to read.
Yeah.
So yeah, I just wanted to say that before we move on to the writer's perspective. Yeah.
Yeah, no, of course. Well, Selena is my biggest point in my writer's perspective. I mean, young adult writers love teens who can do incredible things. And, you know, whether that's escapism or wish fulfillment, whatever. Selena is really that more. She's witty and intelligent like most teen protagonists, but she's deadly, she's smart, and she's strong. I didn't get the whininess in there at all. I mean, for her circumstances, I think she whined very little. But you put a character like this into a fantasy book, and I like fantasy. I grew up reading fantasy. I grew up watching a lot of bad fantasy movies, bad 80s fantasy movies. But a character like this in a well-written fantasy book, because fantasy books are sometimes known for having lots of characters that are kind of cool, not necessarily having one character that's overwhelmingly cool. She's overwhelmingly cool to me. And I think the world that Moss drew in this is great. I didn't know about that wrote the first draft at 16, revised it for 10 years thing. I think that's pretty incredible. But I think that this series, I'm really excited to see where it goes going forward. I mean, I saw those reviews as well that that book 2 is like a solid 5-star, which means it's 4.8 stars. There aren't many books like that on Amazon at all, let alone a big popular second book in a series. So pretty incredible. Can't wait to read more. I think there's a lot that writers can pick up from this, but particularly how compelling the main character is.
Yeah, especially when you think there's some rules broken here, because here she is, she's this deadly assassin, yet what irritated me was that you only really ever heard about that through backstory exposition, and some of that was even just telling. So we kind of didn't see a lot of it. We got inside her head. And we didn't, until the latter half of the book, or maybe even the latter 20% of the book, start to really get a sense of, you know, how deadly this girl was, because she never really showed it. So I was sort of on edge all the time, waiting for this, you know, when's she going to be the assassin? Because you know, that's pretty sort of full on. So I would have liked to have seen more of that, and I'm kind of expecting that in book 2 we'll see more of that. But despite that, you could take that as a criticism. As you say, it's got spectacular reviews. We both loved the book. It kept me coming back day after day. So something clearly transcended what you might have said. If someone was a structural editor, they may have said, oh, you know, you need to put some showing of Selena being an assassin at the start. And I still would recommend that. But this book gets away with it. It doesn't know what it is. Is it a fantasy book? Is it a Hunger Games ripoff? Is it a love story? Is it a thriller with a deadly assassin? It's all of those.
Yeah. Yeah. And I think the most popular books do break a fair amount of rules along the way, for sure. And by combining things through the author's own lens, you know, if you tried to write a book that combined those 4 genres, or I tried to write a book that combined those 4 genres, it would turn out very differently than what Throne of Glass turned out to be. So I think it's great that when authors combine different aspects. I gotta say here, though, I mean, I was in from the beginning on this one, and I think that it made sense to me that she didn't show her powers quite yet, because she was basically beaten up and emaciated for an entire year, and the story of her killing 23 guards or whatever on her way to the wall that came out towards the beginning, which is not really a big spoiler, because I think it's in the first three chapters, but yeah, and that was enough for me for a while, and maybe that's because I just love training montages, because the whole almost the entire book was a training montage, and that, I mean, that's the best part of every like a Rocky movie or a Karate Kid. And so if you have an entire book that's a training montage, I'm in. And I'll probably be in for book 2 anyway, even though it probably won't be a training montage anymore. And the first chapter of book 2 was in the audio version, so for the first few chapters. Yep. So I'm already kind of like, but yeah, I loved that aspect of it for sure.
Yeah, it's a really good point, actually. I kind of missed that. You're dead right. It was a lot about the training, and every day she was doing something, improving a bit more. And also, I suppose the restrictive element, she was told not to reveal her true identity, so no one was supposed to know that she was this deadly, world famous assassin. Who would be known by name to everybody at the King's Palace. So, and I don't think that's particularly a spoiler either, because it happens pretty early on. So, I agree. You're dead right. In that respect, she wouldn't have probably been able to show her skills, because otherwise it would have given the whole game away. So, in a way, I suppose that creates some of the suspense. So, I'd be interested to know what other people think. I'd still give it. I'd give it 4 or 5 stars for sure, and it averages 4.4 or something. So
something like that,
So I think these are interesting editorial critiques that actually, clearly the book totally gets away with. There are some plot points that are quite convenient or even silly, and the 2 male characters I found quite infuriating. But every time we came back to Selena, I was hooked.
Yeah. I didn't mind the male characters either. I just love this book. But would you rather do, because we always give 3 takeaways, would you rather do 2 takeaways or 1 takeaway?
Let me have a look.
Because those are the options.
See what I've got as my options for the takeaway.
All right.
Well, I'll go with 1, because I think otherwise I might sound too negative. I think you're gonna...
Cool. Well, I'll do 1, and you can do the one in the middle. So my first takeaway is to make your protagonist amazing in a realistic way. I mean, she's not going to be able to fight people right after being in prison for a year. She needs to build herself back up. And I thought that was very realistically done. And the fact that, she's not just some natural assassin. She studied for 10 years with the king of the assassins. I mean, come on, like that totally makes sense to me. If you're growing up doing something, it's like playing the violin for 10 years. You just become an aficionado at it. I think creating a amazing and believable protagonist will pay dividends in your story, because like you said, you didn't love the male characters that much. So having someone to come back to, like in Game of Thrones, a lot of it is with Tyrion. People love Tyrion Lannister. So in Game of Thrones, as long as there's a Tyrion chapter to look forward to, people will deal with that chapters and character point of views they maybe don't like as much. So definitely have your main character. If they're awesome, you're going to be able to get away with a lot.
Yeah, totally. And she is awesome. There's no question about that. She's so well drawn. I really liked her.
Yeah.
Should we move to mine?
Take away.
Okay, take away. Look, I think there's still plenty of room for Hunger Games spin-offs. And whilst it might be unfair to call this a Hunger Games spin-off because it was written first 10 years ago, and also the author was inspired by the Cinderella story. So let's be quite clear. No one's claiming that the author did this deliberately. It just is one of those coincidences, but it's still a game of challenge, and it's a game of last person standing. Wins the coup, wins the coup of the prize of, and in her case, freedom is what she's going to win, which would make sense for someone who's been in prison. And so I think there's still plenty of room for that. We've reviewed other books like The Testing, for example, also has done that extremely well. So it's kind of nice to see, that there's that theme. If you like the Hunger Games and you don't mind fantasy, then this is definitely a book for you.
Yeah, I agree. I totally agree. Good points. Third takeaway is build your fantasy world slowly. I think that we there's some magic in this world, and it's only briefly touched upon early. And as we go on, we see a little bit more of it. And I think that makes it a little more believable for readers, because if they don't buy into the full-on fantasy, the full-on fairies, full-on all that sorts of stuff, if you don't believe it, if you're not in on that sort of genre, and then a book starts with like a ton of that stuff, then you're not going to be as in as if until you're kind of more of a straight-edged book, and then it becomes more and more fantastical as it goes along, which, all comes to a head in the climax. And I think that helps when you're doing, especially a first book, because you want to get as many people in on your first book as possible. So if you don't go all in right away, then I think obviously you need to have an exciting hook at the beginning, but your hook doesn't need to be fantastical. So if you're making something fantastical, consider doing a slow drip of information with that until you get your readers hooked, and then go all in with all of your plans.
Yeah, I think that's really well said, Brian, because it's too easy with fantasy to get sidetracked by the kind of cool and special things that everybody can do with the magic, and then make the magic rules the plot. And in this particular case, although the magic does play a significant role, it's certainly built very slowly, and so at no point do you suddenly think, oh, here we go, the silly magical powers that get bestowed on the girl when she turns 18. It's not like that at all, which is great.
No.
So yeah, it's a really well observed point.
Well, thank you. I appreciate that.
Hey, the book is very theatrical, actually. I forgot to mention that. I think that's a
good point.
It's extremely descriptive. I mean, you've got this glass palace built on top of an older palace. There's some wonderful descriptions of uniforms, of dresses, and I can see it being a pretty spectacular movie, actually. So let's hope.
Oh my gosh, that would be so great. That would be so great.
Brian is there.
I'm there.
He's going to be an extra. He's going to be one of those royal guards.
Oh, that would be great. Let's talk about the prompt. Are you ready for a prompt?
I am totally ready.
All right. A 1,000-year-old a 1,000-year-old spirit has come back from the dead to give you a mission. Will you accept it? Why or why not? And if so, how will you possibly achieve the spirit's goal?
Whoa. Don't hold back, Brian. We could have a 12-book series out of that.
I know. That would be, man. I would love it if someone wrote a book off of one of these prompts. I've been told that someone wrote a book off of one of my prompts from one of my books before, but yeah, I mean, that would just be really cool. That's our prompt. Write it.
In the comments.
Write it in the comments on the splitbookreviews.com or on YouTube with the Split YouTube channel. Now that we have that all up, it's nice to be able to talk about it and everything. You can also subscribe to us on YouTube, on iTunes and YouTube. You can leave a review on iTunes, all that sorts of great stuff. And we've been getting some great suggestions for books. And you can shoot us an email on the contact form at the Split Book Reviews, and we will consider the book that you want reviewed for our show. So, yeah, great episode. I think this might have been our longest one.
Must be a book you love.
Must be. I see myself. I got brighter as the episode went on.
You did.
Don't know why that happened.
I think it was the magic you were talking about. It gradually drip fed, and then it came on full on at the end there.
Yeah, the audio people aren't going to know what I'm talking about. But,
that's right.
But yeah.
You should really go and check him out. He's very handsome.
You. This was a lot of fun. I love talking about this. We'll definitely have to review the sequel at some point soon. Great episode. That's Robert Scanlon. He writes the Dreamer Chronicles. I'm Brian Cohen. I write the Ted Saves the World series. Thank you guys so much. Listen, subscribe, write reviews, do all that good stuff. And we'll be back here next week with another new book to review.
And please, children, do not assassinate anybody between now and the next episode.
Good point. Thank you guys for watching. Somewhere on this page is a subscribe button to the Split channel. We do reviews every week. We would love it if you followed us every single week. Isn't that right, Robin?
That's exactly right. Follow us now. Hit the subscribe button.
Do it.